Hello and welcome back to my baseball stadium. Last time we finished up the logic for the game itself, and it is fully playable, but I pointed out that it can be difficult to keep track of where you are in the game. So today I'm going to show you how to implement the game board that displays the number of outs, the inning you're in, and who is batting. Before we do that though, there are two logic connections that I forgot to make last time. They're not critical, but they are on the logic diagrams. I just forgot to hook it up in the video. So let me do that first. When the player is running the bases and they touch a base, we'd want some cheering. And the easiest way to hook that up is through the scoreboard. So on the scoreboard, we're going to do a new logic connection. When player 1's score is changed, we will input into our cheering logic gate. And we'll do the same connection for player 2. So a new logic connection when player 2's score is changed, input into our cheering logic gate. Again, it's not critical for the game, but it is kind of nice. One more thing. In the previous video, one of the viewers had pointed out that I'd forgotten to show the properties for these time delayers. So let me show those. The delay time on this one is 1. The delay time on this one is 2. Alright, so now we'll move on to the scoreboard. And let me remind you again that I've got logic diagrams on my blog that will help you out. The link's in the video description. You can see I've already added some toys here ahead of time, but before we get to those, let's build the actual scoreboard. And we'll start in the terrain category. Oh man, it reset my drawers on me here. Alright, so we're going to begin with this long tiny terrain block, and we're going to kind of center this in here on this board like that. Don't put it up next to the stands though. Back it up at least one nudge. And I want to set the theme on this to be the Metroville theme. We'll set that to be the theme, so all the blocks we put down will use that theme. Alright, and then we'll just build the scoreboard. And the reason that needs to be back away from the stadium stands is because we're going to put a facing on the front of that. So it needs to be sitting back far enough to accommodate that. Alright, now under the basic blocks, the color changing blocks are right here. And we're going to put 9 of these across the bottom. 5, 6, 7, 9. And then a terrain cube to fill that in. And then our indicators for the bottom of the inning and the top of the inning. Okay, and then for the outs, and then just fill in some terrain cubes around that. So that's pretty straightforward. And then we'll put a roof on the top of this. Alright, now the front of that looks pretty ugly. So what we're going to do is come to the basic blocks drawer and go to the left for these wall textures. And there's only one way this wall will sit on the front of that. So make sure you pick the right way. And we're going to set the theme on these blocks to use the modern theme. I'll set that to be my theme. And then we just fill in around our color changing blocks. And this is why we had to be out away from the stadium stands, because if we didn't, we'd run into that problem. So that's why I had to set this game board back a little bit. But these little blocks here are just going to cover up all of this ugliness. And that'll really make the color changing blocks pop. And there we go. There is our game board. Okay, now for the logic for this, there's not a whole lot of controls that we're going to need, but I put these in kind of the same categories as the others. So these two controls here, as you remember, manage the number of outs in the inning, as indicated by that little decoration. And so for the outs display, I stuck some additional controls back here. Likewise, this is the counter for the innings. And so for the innings display on the game board, we've got additional controls here. For the top and bottom of the inning, you'll notice we don't need any additional controls for those. We can plug directly into these. Alright, so for the outs, we have a time delayer, 2 logic gates, and 3 counters, 1 for each of the color changing blocks. And I don't know if this is the most elegant way to do this, but it seemed the easiest way for me. And then for the number of innings, again, we have 2 logic gates, and we have 8 counters. There are 9 innings, but only 8 counters. All right. This counter starts at target count number 2. You don't need a counter for the first for the first inning, because when you start the game, you're in the first inning. The properties on this one likewise are set same way, except target count is 3. For this one, the target count is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so set the properties like you saw there, and you can pause the video on those screens to make sure they get set properly. Likewise, the count on this one is set to 1. The count on this one is set to 2. The count on this one is set to 3. And visible display does not need to be on for any of these. And this time delayer is using the default time delay of 1. So that's how all the properties are set on the new controls. Okay, so let's start with the challenge maker, because when the player first starts the game, we want to initialize our game board. And let me grab my diagrams here for this. Okay, so on the challenge maker, new logic connection on invites accepted. First thing we're going to do is come over to our game board and set the display for the top of the inning. I'm going to set that color changing block to green. And by the way, the properties on all of these, the default is set to dark gray, and that's fine. On the challenge maker, new logic connection on invites accepted. We probably don't need to do this, but for completeness, it's a good idea. We're going to come over to the color changing block for the bottom of the inning and restore it. And that'll change it back to what it is in the default in the properties, which is dark gray. On the challenge maker, new logic connection on invites accepted. We're going to light up the indicator for inning number 1. We'll set that to green. I'm using green as the color on my board. You can use whatever color you want, but we're going to use green. All right, and then there's 2 more things that this needs to do. We want to make sure we initialize all of the other color changing blocks and all of these counters. And we're going to have to do this at several different intervals, and so that's why I've got some logic gates out here. So this logic gate here on your diagrams is labeled reset outs. All right, That's what this one is for. This one is labeled display outs. This one is reset innings. And this one is count innings. Okay? So that's how those are labeled on your diagrams. So the reset outs, this needs to do a few things. We're going to do a new logic connection on output. And what we're going to do is come over to the outs blocks and do a restore. Make that same connection for the other two. On output from the reset outs logic gate, that needs to restore all three of those color blocks. Okay? The other thing this block needs to do on output, or this logic gate needs to do on output, is reset all of these counters. So all three of the counters for those color changing blocks. And again, every color changing block has its own counter. On output, reset. So make the connection to reset the other two color changing blocks, and then this will be working properly. This counter here goes with the first color changing block for out number 1. This one goes to the other one for out number 2. This one goes to the last color changing block for out number 3. You're going to see that in a moment. Likewise, this one, we need to do a new logic connection on output. This is for the innings, so we got to do the same thing for the innings. You want to come over to each of the color changing blocks for the innings and do a restore. Make that same connection for the other 8 color changing blocks. And likewise, do a new logic connection on output, reset these counters. Make that same connection for the other 7 counters. So this logic gate here needs to reset all 8 counters for innings, all 9 color changing blocks for innings. All right? Now this one is going to do the incrementing for the innings. So every time we get to a new inning, this one's going to increment. So on output from this logic gate, we're going to increment each of these counters by 1. Okay? Make that same connection for the other 7 counters. Again, this is the count inning logic gate on your diagrams. You want to make sure you increment all of these counters. And we'll hook those counters up in a moment. Alright, so when the game is started, on the challenge maker, a new logic connection on invites accepted. We want to come over to our reset outs logic gate and input. That is going to make sure all of the color changing blocks for the outs are turned off, and it's going to initialize these gates by, or these counters by resetting them. All right. The level starter should also do that, by the way, just to make sure that game board's not showing anything from a previous game. So we will do an input into this logic gate for reset outs. We'll also do the same thing for the innings. So new logic connection on catalyze from the level starter. We'll input into the reset innings logic gate. That just makes sure all the counters are cleared and reset, and all of those color changing blocks are gray when they first load the toy box. And the last thing we need to do on invites accepted at the challenge maker, new logic connection on invites accepted, we want to come over to our count inning logic gate and input. And this is going to increment all of these counters by 1. All the counters by default start at 0. But when the game starts, we're already in inning number 1, so we want to make sure all of those counters reflect that. All right, and that is everything on the invites accepted diagram. Now, when the game is ended, there's a little bit of cleanup we need to do, so let's do that and then we'll be done with the challenge maker. So on the challenge maker, on game ended, we want to make sure we clear the indicators for the top of the inning and the bottom of the inning, so we need to do a restore on those blocks. A new logic connection on game ended. What was that up in the corner? I guess it was from that blimp. And we'll do a restore on that one as well. And then we also need to clear all those other ones. So on the challenge maker, new logic connection, when the game is ended, we will reset all of the outs, so we input into the reset outs logic gate. And on the challenge maker, new logic connection, when the game is ended, we're going to input into the reset innings logic gate. Okay, and that's everything on the game ended. It's basically just clearing the game board. Okay, so plugging into the top and bottom of the inning, these two counters, as I mentioned in a previous episode, handle that. So as this is incrementing the number of outs, and we reach the third out, this is the counter for switching the players. It's called counter labeled switch on the diagrams. So the players switch sides in the middle of the inning. This one, they do the same thing at the end of the inning. So on the one for the middle of the inning, on this counter, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the target is reached, we want to switch these indicators. So on the top of the inning, we want to set that to restore. So that'll make that one go dark. And then we want to light up the color changing block for the bottom of the inning. So a new logic connection on target reached. We want to set the bottom indicator green. All right, and then we need to do the same thing with the top of the bottom of the inning when we reach the end of that, and actually the end of the inning itself. And right now this counter is invoking this time delayer here, which will reset each of these counters. And I explained the reason for this, but we can just plug into this to do the indicators over there as well. And it's important that you do it off of this time delayer, not directly off of this counter, because otherwise I've noticed there's some bugs in that game board, because other things are changing the number of outs and we're resetting this, and so it just makes more sense to wait for everything to clear to do that. So on this time delayer, and this is the reset inning time delayer, we'll do a new logic connection. When the delay is completed, we're resetting for the next inning. So we're going to come back over here and light up the indicator for the top of the inning. And we'll restore the bottom one to make it go dark. New logic connection on that time delayer when the delay is completed. Do a restore on that. And that's it for the top and bottom of the inning, which is why you can see we didn't really need any additional controls for that. All right. Now for the number of outs. Let's let's do it this way. So the outs get handled when the ball goes into the soccer goal. So on the soccer goal, a new logic connection, when a goal is scored by a physics ball, we're going to input into this logic gate. This is the display outs logic gate. And what this needs to do is increment all of those counters. So on output from here, we're going to increment the counter by 1 for out number 1. We're going to do the same thing for the other two. So on output, increment by 1, and on output, increment this one by 1. Okay? And each of these counters has a corresponding color changing block over there. So this one, the target count was set to 1. So the very first ball that rolls into here, it's going to come over to input into this gate, and it's going to increment all of these counters. And this one's immediately going to reach its target count. So on this one, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the target is reached, we're going to come over to the color changing block for out number 1 and set that to green. Then they play the next one, and the second ball rolls into the goal. It inputs into this gate. We increment all the counters, and then this one reaches its target count. So on this one, when target is reached, we set this block green. And we do the same thing for the out number 3 counter. When the target is reached on that one, we set the third out block to green. All right. And on the third out, this counter here, which keeps track of the number of outs, reaches its target, and it invokes this thing to switch sides for the players. So on this counter, again, this is the switch counter, is how it's labeled on the diagrams. We want to reset the outs display. And we can't go directly to this logic gate to do that, because at the same time that would be trying to reset that, this is going to be incrementing these counters. And so we can run into conflicts where this one's trying to light up that third block, this one's trying to clear it. And that's why we have this time delayer in here. So on the switch counter, new logic connection, when the target is reached, we're going to start this time delayer. And 1 second later, that goes off. On that time delayer, we want to do when delay completed, then we'll input into this logic gate. So what happens is when the third out is recorded, this will light up green. And then 1 second later, that time delayer goes off and all of these go dark, indicating we're switching into the next inning. So you actually get to see that out indicator light up for a moment, which is, I think, a good thing. All right. And then on this counter, when we reach the bottom of the inning, and that is over, and the second player has had their time at bat, then we need to do the same thing. So, new logic connection, when that target is reached, we're going to start the delay. And then 1 second later, that'll cause those things to reset as well. And that's it for the display for the outs. So far, so good. All right, the last thing we have are the innings. And this actually isn't too bad. So on inning end, which again is this counter here, so when we reach the end of the inning, both players have batted. We want to increment the counter for the number of innings, which it's already doing. We hooked that up in an earlier video. We also need to increment all of those counters. So on this counter here, new logic connection, when its target is reached, again this is the inning end counter, we're going to input into this gate, which will then increment all of these counters for the number of innings. And again, each of these counters corresponds to one of the color changing blocks. This is the counter for inning number 2, because that's the target count on it. So on this counter, a new logic connection, when that target is reached, we're going to come over to the color changing block for inning number 2 and set that to green. Make that same connection for each of the other counters and their corresponding color changing block. So this is the counter for inning number 3. It's going to hook up to the 3rd color changing block when target is reached to set that green. Same thing for inning number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Make that same connection. When target is reached, light up its corresponding color changing block. And so as you're progressing through the innings, and this is updating or incrementing the inning count, it's also incrementing the count on the display. And each of these counters will light up their corresponding block on the game board. Okay, and I believe that is it. That's everything. At this point, you can then move all of these controls below the terrain. I would probably leave this one out here just in case you want to save or want to change the inning count before you start, if you only want to play 3 innings or something. All the rest of these, though, can move below the terrain. And then you'll notice I've placed a bunch of trees over here. These are out of the plants drawer. They're the Metroville tree and the large Metroville tree. So you can kind of create like a little park setting over here. Just kind of fill this in. Place a few of these little trees in there, and you'll just have a really nice starting point for your game. The other thing I want to point out too is if you run into problems when you're playing the game and you're ground pounding it and shooting it and you find the ball getting out of the stadium, especially out the back, you can put in some scalable barrier blocks in here if you need to, out of the platforming toys. So you can drop these, make them a little bit high, and just kind of help prevent the ball from getting out of play. I haven't noticed that I've needed these, but if you need to do that, you can do that. You can run these things down along the perimeter of the stadium in case they get out this way. You can do it around the back of this and so on. Don't know that you'll need those, but if you find it getting out of play because you're getting pretty wild with what you're doing to the ball and it's really flying, that could be useful. But with that, baseball is done, and so is this series. Finally. I don't currently have any more sports games planned, but who knows? I may create some additional ones in the future, and if I do, I'll return to this series and add on to it. If there's a sports game that you would like to see in the toy box that I haven't done, leave a comment and let me know. I might tinker with an idea or two in my spare time, but again, I make no promises. Next time, we'll be returning to Disneyland, and I'll do the playthrough for the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. That'll be our next project. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to visit my blog, where I've got logic diagrams for today's episode that will help you out. Again, the link is in the video description. And if you like Disney Infinity, and you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, just click my photo in the lower right corner of this video. That's all for me today. Take care.